Welcome to the Intentional Encourager podcast, where each episode brings you compelling conversations and stories designed to entertain, enlighten, and encourage. And now here's your host, Brian Sexton.
And welcome into the Intentional Encourager podcast. I'm your host, Brian Sexton. Thank you for joining us again today. And it is my great treat to have with us today April Jones. She is the author of No Mess, No Message. And I got to admit, the first time I read that title, I thought she was like saying no mas. I thought it was Spanish. So that was my fault that I totally missed that. But it's No Mess, No Message. And she's the owner of the Drifted Drum Company. And she does these great events called No Pity Party. And I can promise you that there will be no pity party here today on the Intentional Encourager podcast with April Jones in the house. April, how are you today? Welcome to the Intentional Encourager podcast.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, Brian. It's really a pleasure.
Listen, for those of you that will watch this on video, the pleasure is all mine because the pretty factor has gone infinitely through the ceiling. You know, look at side by side. Look at me, look at her, look at me, look at her. But no, it is a real pleasure to have you. Thank you for joining me today. You know, I ask this question of everybody because as we record this in the midst of COVID-19 and things like that, and you live outside of Nashville, so everything is different in different places. What's the biggest thing that you have learned through this pandemic, maybe about yourself or about other people, and then you go, because of this pandemic, I have figured this out. What's that been for you?
I would say I think in the last couple of years, I've really taken time to try to reprioritize a lot of things a little bit. And so I've been intentional about that, but I think that this year really did make me realize how much busy stuff, like just extra stuff and layers that we have in our life. And so as we are forced to trim some of that away, I think everyone has reacted a little differently to that. And I think your kind of underlying foundation of what your perspectives are of your current situations or your relationships or the way you communicate with others really kind of became amplified.
Mm-hmm.
For some, that was a good thing. And for some, I think that's been a bad thing. And I think for our culture overall, we've seen that as a roller coaster in our country for this entire year. And just to kind of watch it play out has been surprising. But it's also, I think, grown my relationship even more, you know, with God, having this be part of our journey, all of our journey. It's made me realize how important unity is, trusting God, just relationship, and honestly, just empathy too, right? And I always talk about how empathy is important, but I think this year it just really has brought it to a new level. So I think I've learned a lot through this pandemic for sure, but definitely still grateful.
Well, and again, I think people, when they look at situations and circumstances, they go, well, we can't do this and we can't do that. And we go out in public, we have to wear a mask. And it feels like, April, that all these things start piling on people. And then what we talked about a minute ago, they start to have their own pity party because they start to think, well, you know, if we hadn't had this pandemic, I'd be doing this. I've had to cancel a trip and things like that. How do people avoid getting to the point where they look and they go, I'm more focused on how I'm feeling than actually what's going on around me? Because if you look at what's going on around you, you could say, well, hey, we're still blessed. We've still got a lot of things going on. How do people avoid pity parties in the midst of a pandemic? I know I put the P's together and it's like, you know, it's like the alliteration, but really, how do we avoid the pity party inside the pandemic?
Yeah, I think self-analysis is super, super important, and like taking a pulse on where your personal emotional intelligence is, to be honest. And if you find that you are overwhelmed and depressed and, feeling isolated and sensitive, then it's time to take some action and try to figure out, okay, well, yes, I'm being faced with a lot of things that I can't control right now, but there's a lot of things that I can control. And so what do I do about that? And I think that positivity is not just a state of being, but it's an intentional exercise.
You lost me when you said intelligence, because I was just like, I don't possess a great deal of that. So, when you said emotional intelligence, I was just like, nah, she can't be talking about somebody like me, that has to have a phone to find his way anywhere. But no, I think you're right. I think a lot of times, people are so busy doing things and being just immersed in going to work, and if they have kids, being involved in sports and extracurricular activities, and we fill our days up with so much stuff that at night it's just maybe it's collapsing as your head hits the pillow, and not really thinking about, now, okay, am I doing okay? Is everything inside as good as it could be emotionally? Because I think a lot of times too, you've got teenage kids. I have a soon to be 20-year-old. You're so caught up in what your kids are doing and what your family's doing, and running here and running there and doing this and doing that, that a lot of times you push those emotional things to the side and you just go, okay, I'll deal with that later. Well, the pandemic is when we first all got quarantined and everybody would, you're going to die if you left the house. People were starting to think about that stuff. I want you to go a little deeper there with emotional intelligence. And, April, when if somebody's listening to this conversation between you and I, and they say, look, I've really had to really face some things I haven't had to face before. Walk me through a lot of times what you think that looks like for somebody that hasn't had to have those hard emotional conversations internally with themselves before.
Yeah. So I feel like I touch about this in my book because I think it's different now because maybe we're all kind of dealing with unexpected adversity. But I think that in general, we all face it just at different times, and the types of adversity look a little bit different, right? So it's I see it being very typical for people to tend to completely internalize, where they're just, they silo themselves off. They feel like communication is not important if they feel like there aren't others that can help their situation. So I think that's a natural response. And so I feel like one of the most important things is self-analysis. It's okay you have to give yourself some grace to feel the way that you're feeling, and then you have to interpret, okay, out of all of this mess, out of all this mess, what am I okay with? What am I not okay with? What can I take action towards helping? What is out of my control? So for example, if we think about my situation that I share in my book personally as being one of the biggest adversities I faced, it has been childhood cancer when I was in grad school and my son was 2. And in a situation like that, there are definitely things that you can and cannot control. Couldn't control the fact that he had cancer. I couldn't control how he would respond to therapy or the side effects or any of that stuff, or that it was happening. It was going to happen, and I couldn't stop that. But what I could control is, I could spend as many moments with him, comforting him, listening to him, trying to understand what he was going through. I could figure out, what could I control in my personal situation that made me feel better, more in control. And that was, continuing to push through school. And that might not have been the right, just because that's what was right for me doesn't mean that's what's right for everyone. So you kind of have to really figure out, you have to know yourself, basically. I mean, if you know yourself when you're not in the middle of chaos and adversity, then you're going to know a little bit more how to respond when you are in that. So
we'll jump, we're going to jump ahead. I want to continue here, but we'll go back and tell more of that story. But here's a question that I had kind of top of mind is I think a lot of people, April, will look at this pandemic and they'll go, okay, we've been doing this since the middle of March and there doesn't seem to be an end in sight. But there is an other side to this thing. There's always the other side of whatever it is in life we go through. When you're in the middle of that and you're walking, is it hard, or was it hard in your situation with your son to see the other side?
Yeah, I think that it's always our tendency, I think, to imagine the different outcomes that could play out, right? The different scenarios. So, if you try to anticipate what it looks like afterwards, sometimes it can help you deal with what it looks like in your situation at the time. For the pandemic, I would say that we have to figure out what can we learn right now and what we're dealing with that will make us stronger once things hopefully start to normalize again. And, for some of us, it's financial. For some of us, it's being intentional with our time management, intentional with our relationships, trimming out the layers that of waste within the things that waste our energy, things that waste our time, things that deplete our positivity. So, for me, when I was in the middle of our situation, obviously it was very overwhelming, but as I thought about what the potential options are, obviously the scariest one was that, Tyler might pass away. And, but it was actually in that is where I figured out how to get release, right? So I shared my book about a friend of ours who was very supportive and close to us during that time, who had lost their son just a couple of years before. And he was a similar age as Tyler, who's also a toddler. And they were incredibly strong and spiritual and supportive. And I thought, if the worst thing that happened, the biggest thing that I'm scared of in all of this, happened to them, and they're still who they are today, then there's hope for me. And I think that a lot of us need a success story to be hopeful sometimes, that the absolute worst thing could happen and you could still have hope. And I think that's how we gain credibility in our crisis, right? So sometimes it's that will help others relate to us, not the education we have, not anything we've accomplished, but just the fact that we've gotten through something and have been able to move on.
Yeah, that's a great point. I want you to take me through your story, because you've got an interesting journey. And again, we'll weave that part of the conversation about your son, but I want to really dive into you and your life and how you got from point A to point B, because everybody has a life story that makes them who they are. And whether it's a circumstance or, in your case with your son. But I want you to tell the audience your life story. Start as far back as you want to go and how you got from point A to point B.
Yeah, I grew up in a small town in West Tennessee. So, humble upbringing. My mom and dad got a divorce, I guess, around elementary, maybe right before junior high. And so, essentially kind of a single parent atmosphere during my teenage years. And then I felt like I really needed some stability. I, was trying to determine like who I was supposed to be, or, like I made good grades, and then I cheered for a while. And then, I also like would do things I, wasn't supposed to do. I would party and, I didn't know who I was supposed to be or what was going to happen. I couldn't see my future in that kind of small town environment. I felt very, very judged, I guess. Maybe I wasn't being judged. Maybe I was just being insecure. But I ended up starting to date this guy. He was just 3 years. He was 3 years older than me, but I was 16, and he was 19. And luckily, he didn't want to stay there either. And I just kind of saw like this opportunity. Like he was always very supportive. He was always, encouraging of me and reminding me like what my talents were and believing in me. And so we stuck together for a little while, and I actually graduated high school early and went to college. And I did a double major in chemistry and biology, and I wanted to cure cancer. That was my goal. Like I wanted to, it sounded like the best thing that you could do. I really didn't know what that meant at the time, but it sounded like the best thing you could possibly make up to do. So I majored in chemistry and biology, and I did an internship for a summer at St. Jude, and then.
Did you go to school in the Memphis area? Did you end up going to school in the Memphis area, where St. Jude is?
I did. Well, I went to Union in undergrad, and so I ended up getting married. And then a month later, I found out I was pregnant. So it was it was 2 months later, but it was like my third year, it was my second year. I was due to finish my degree in 3 years. So it was my second year in. I was, ambitious, ready to apply for med school. And then I found out I was pregnant. So I still did the internship at St. Jude, and I realized that, even though I was going to be a mom, I could still pursue like whatever. I was still going to, I was still intent, I wanted to be a role model. I didn't just, at that point, I was like, okay, well, I just have to adjust my plans, but it doesn't mean I have to cancel them. And
I don't mean to interrupt. I have to ask you this, because I got to park here for just a minute.
Yeah.
You're doing an internship at St. Jude's. What was the biggest thing that you learned from your time there at St. Jude's? Because you're around, and I don't think it's really an accident, as things would happen later in life, that you had an internship at St. Jude's, when St. Jude's is world renowned for helping children that are facing incredibly difficult situations, and their parents are going through those things. When you were there, and obviously you had no idea what was going to happen later in life to you, but what was the biggest thing that you learned from that time interning at St. Jude's?
So probably two things. I was working in research. So I was pregnant, and I'm confident the only professional oncology student there that was pregnant. And I think there were maybe 50 of us in the program that year or less out of, like the thousands of people who applied all over the country. And I was thankful that I got that opportunity, and I was like, I might be pregnant, but I'm going anyway. So I was in the lab every day, and the first thing I learned was that you don't control research. You have good ideas, and you might be onto something, but truly it's real science is that you don't control the science, and you play it out and see how it goes, and sometimes it works out for you and sometimes it doesn't, and then that's how you plan your next move, right? So I, by nature in my career, you'll see that I've had a lot of administration and management roles, and that's because I appreciate being able to control facets of my environment, and so that was a difficult job for me. Although I loved it, I was curious about everything, and I felt like I was being contributive to a larger purpose, but it was definitely not, you can't control anything that happens in the lab really, except for certain things, but you can't control the outcome. So then the other thing obviously was that we would eat lunch in the cafeteria, and you're surrounded by patients, and so even though we worked in the research wing, there's only one cafeteria. So you saw the patients and the parents, and I came from a small town. I was very sheltered from all of that. I didn't know any kids at the time that had cancer. And I remember sitting at lunch one day and telling my friend Stephanie, who was in the program with me, this could happen to anybody. Like, everyone is here. There's like every nationality, every ethnicity, every religion, old, young, everyone is here. And so it was, that was very, I don't know, that was just very shocking. But I do think it gave me a sense of, it was my first experience to really have a sense of, empathy when it came to healthcare, because I hadn't been exposed to any of that. So I do believe that it helped me. However, I could have never imagined, obviously, just because I said this could happen to anybody, I still didn't appreciate the fact that it could happen to me. And, so it was somewhat ironic, painful irony that, when I found myself in that cafeteria as a mom very shortly after.
Do you think that you ever looked back and said to yourself, I remember being here and eating lunch 2, 3, 4, whatever, how many years later? Did you ever think to yourself, boy, I wish I could, because I've done that at times. And here's where I'm going with this thought is I have said to myself now at 48, boy, I wish I could go back to me at 30 when my son was 2, or 28 when my son was born, put my arm around myself and go, buckle up, big boy. It's about to get interesting, or go to certain points in my life, go back in time now as I am now and put my arm around myself and go, hey, look, here's what you need to do because this is how it's going to turn out. And trust me, it'll be okay. Did you find yourself going back when you were there with your son, going back to that time, sitting there with your friend and recalling those same feelings and thoughts that you had then?
Yeah, absolutely. You wish that you had some foreshadowing. It hits like a, like a hurricane when it comes sometimes especially when it's a life-threatening diagnosis, I think. And but I, actually Tyler came almost 8 weeks early. so I think now I look back and I understand that that gave me a greater appreciation for him and the importance of him and being a mom, because at just turning 20, it wasn't like the most exciting. I mean, I was excited in the little things, but like I just thought of him as another thing that I had to do, kind of like it was another job. And I didn't quite as much appreciate the gift that it was to be becoming a mom. And so when he came early, that really all changed that for sure. And so I think that being able to really appreciate him being healthy and getting the opportunity to be a mom, and just like how he changed my life in a positive way, that really prepared me. I think mentally, you're never prepared mentally for a cancer diagnosis, but it helped me really not like understand the importance of him, and just make him my top priority when like school was still a priority, I was still a priority, but he was my first priority. And I think gaining that appreciation early on made it a little bit easier to weather, because we'd already dealt with some health issues, we'd already dealt with like unexpected challenges. So this was just at a much greater scale.
Let's talk about that now, because again, and I'm a dad of a preemie. Our son was born 5 weeks early. And so you understand that, you may spend a little time in the hospital and this and that. And now premature babies are born every day, and they're healthy and they do well and everything's good. But when did you guys notice that something was wrong? He was 2. Your son Tyler was 2 when he was first diagnosed. What were some of the signs that you guys noticed that something's really wrong here?
It was weird because Tyler had a solid tumor. So, and it was actually in his right foot. So it was really an overnight experience. He was a healthy 20-month toddler one day, and then he was playing in the sprinkler and he stepped on the sprinkler and like kind of bruised his foot and had an abrasion. And then the next week I'm noticing that it was still puffy. And so I like squeezed it, and there was a knot in his foot. And so that was kind of like the beginning of the cascade.
And you're the clinical side of you, because you have some medical background at this point. You've done research at St. Jude's. You've got a pretty solid medical footing behind you and underneath you. When you noticed this knot on his foot, what did the mom instinct kick in, or did the medical instinct kick in?
Well, at first it was medical, which it's funny because as a 22-year-old, I had worked at the hospital, but I did phlebotomy, so that was pretty straightforward. I had worked at St. Jude, but I was in the structural biology lab, so it was very clinical. I did not see very preclinical, so I didn't see any patients or anything like that. And then when I was in my second year of pharmacy school, but it was just starting. Like, we found his tumor in August, so I was just starting a new semester. So the first year, it's just really a lot of your basics. But when we got the diagnosis for cancer, we were actually studying oncology at the time, and it was I thought maybe it was a cyst. Like that was my first gut reaction. It's like, okay, well, he hurt himself. It could have caused inflammation. Maybe he had fluid buildup. Like maybe this is a cyst. So I called the pediatrician and I was just talking through the scenario with her, and she had me bring him in. He was due for shots anyway. So we made an appointment a couple of days later. And, she was like, it could be, and she was like, to be honest, I mean, she was a new mom too. She was, I think she was probably early 30s then. She'd just taken over the practice. And she said, I don't know, but we only get one set of feet. Babies get one set of feet for the rest of their life. So we'll be thorough. So we scheduled and we did an x-ray and you couldn't see anything. And then we scheduled the MRI and it just appeared like magic. So that, it was, at first it was definitely like, I wanted to rationalize the symptoms, what could it be? And then after that, it was, I don't think I was ever in freak out mode. I was always just trying to like say, okay, well, this is what we have to deal with. So now what do we do? This is what we have to deal with. So now what do we do? Because it's the only way I think I could have gotten through it, because of my personality.
Taking it, okay, this is, we have to go here and we have to do this and we have to do that. And do you think that was helpful for you to keep it very structured and go A, B, C, D, E, F steps along the way? Because again, I'm more emotionally wired. Logical things, I'm like, whatever. Some people, my wife is more process oriented, task oriented, things like that. Do you think it helped you being task oriented to keep you on track with everything else? Starting pharmacy school, you're married less than 2 years, less than 3 years. You have a child. Did it help you being task oriented and process oriented?
It did. And I'm definitely not going to criticize myself for the way that I processed it all. However, I will say that I wish that I had given myself more ability to just breathe, to just feel what I felt, not feel bad about it. But I felt like being strong was important, because I couldn't fall apart, because, I still had to be mom and I still had to do all this other stuff. And that was the part that I could control. So it made me feel less out of control in the situation.
Do you think for yourself, because I'm thinking about people like that, and in those moments that they're real, and you said, I was doing all this and didn't really take time to breathe and things like that. Do you feel like in those moments that if you would have sat down with a cup of coffee, put your feet up, and really reflected, that you would have probably lost it? And maybe as the best.
Definitely afraid that I would fall apart, for sure.
Yeah, because in April, the reason that I asked that is, and I want to, again, I'm not apologizing for this conversation being real and authentic, is that a lot of people are like that, in the sense of, I stay busy and I plow through, because if I sat down and really grasped the whole universe of what we're in that moment, I would fall apart. Like I have that mechanism sometimes. Like there are sometimes I'm like, yeah, tell me a joke. Otherwise I would sit over here and cry for an hour.
Yeah.
It's better for me in me emotionally. It's better for me to laugh than cry, because if I cried, I probably wouldn't stop. I would tap into that part of. Did you have days where you broke down and said, why is this happening to me with everything I have going on? Why are we going through this?
I do share. I do share in my book that there was 2 instances that really stood out to me, and One was when my friends were asking me in the hallway at school, like for an update about how everything was going. We just gotten we just found out that it was cancer. And I, said, well, like when I knew, when I knew that it was, that we had something going on. And we had a misdiagnosis too. So I was like, when I knew that we had like something going on, then I thought, okay, well, as long as it's, as long as it's nothing serious. And then we had to have surgery. And I was like, and then once we had surgery, I was like, well, as long as it's not cancer. And then it wasn't cancer. And then they came back and said, well, it actually is. And then I was like, so what now? Like, I just was like, how do I rationalize? Like, how do I see the positive in this situation? Because like, I could deal with that. I could deal with that, but I don't know that I can deal with this. And so I just remember crying in the hallway, like with my hands over my face. Like, I just can't do this. It was like one of those moments where I was like, yes, like I can't really just talk about this or process what's happening because it's too hard. I can deal with all this other stuff and I can go through the motions, but I can't deal with my feelings right now because it's just not, I can't do it. And so, and then there was another time where, we knew that when the chemotherapy wasn't working. And so I just remember just like allowing myself to just really break down at one point. And I remember probably, just 20 minutes maybe of just like, just really just letting myself just cry and just acknowledge that what was happening was like, it was okay to not be okay. And I think that now, like, it took me years to acknowledge that what we went through was hard. Like for the longest time, I just said, oh, we got through it. It's okay. Like, no, it was a bad situation, but we're fine. And I think that it took me, it really did take me years to acknowledge that what we went through was painful and it was significant. And I wish that I had allowed myself more moments. I do think it would have been, I powered through that, but at the same time, I don't necessarily think that it was the best way or think that everyone should be that way, because now after years in healthcare, I'm not a psychologist, but I do think that in dealing with a lot of people and with a lot of patients and a lot of other cancer moms, I think that the more that you suppress those feelings and don't allow yourself to deal with them, the more you're at risk for more depression or suicidal thoughts or being overwhelmed. And I think that for me, what happened is over time, I had to forgive. I had to forgive God, like those angry feelings that I felt, and I had to just come to terms with everything that happened and see that, like I had to start building a relationship with God, and that's what made me stronger, and that's what helped me through. And
The
I don't
Lord
think
wasn't
that,
punishing you and your family,
no.
and that is so
But I thought
important.
that.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
it was one of the things that I questioned, at the time, like, because
And it's very natural to do that, because a lot of people say, well, God, you did this, or God, why did you do this? And thinking to yourself, okay, well, I didn't do this, so it had to be God. And God, you could have prevented this if you would have just, obviously I did something wrong. Why would you do? I think what you just said there was so powerful. You had to forgive God, because we think of forgiveness is that God forgives us. And he does all the time when we make mistakes, plenty of them. I'm raising my hand first. But to forgive God and say, it wasn't your fault. You allowed this for whatever reason to come into our lives. We don't know it yet, but you do. And so I forgive you for and I want to make that relationship better. I've got to ask this. I didn't mean to jump in there, but that was Well, it's like, you get a thought in your head. It's like, at my age, you just kind of tend to forget it. Like, oh my goodness. But how was your husband through all this? Because I know how I would be as a dad. I know how my wife would be as a mom. And I've been in those situations, when my sons had to have surgeries and things like that. And you got to be strong for your wife and strong. How did your husband deal with all that?
Well, I mean, we were both pretty young. If you think about it, I was 22, or almost 22. He was 25, and we were still trying to figure out how to be grown-ups, I think, partly, and how to be parents of a normal kid, much less a sick kid, right?
And the reason I asked that is because you mentioned when you guys were dating that he was supportive and he pushed, you've got, pushing you for your dreams and things like that. And now you guys are all in on a situation that's life altering. I mean, you think being parents life altering, now you've really got a situation that's life altering. So I'm just curious there, did did he continue to support you in the same way?
Yes, I think that there were a lot of things that it was kind of nice because there were a lot of things that we didn't really talk about. Like we just agreed to be, like we just kind of knew we were on the same page, and I didn't have to talk about my feelings and I didn't expect him to talk about his feelings, and we just kind of knew that we were having to deal with this together and it sucked, and that we were going to just try to be as positive and loving to Tyler as we possibly could and get through each day. And I think we just tried to show each other a little grace in that, if the laundry wasn't done, we did it together. If we didn't feel like cooking dinner, then he'd pick up takeout on the way home from the police department. I mean, it was just, it's just one of those things where we tried to be considerate of each other and just didn't expect, we just didn't try to expect too much. Like we both knew that we were going through something hard, and we just tried to be there for each other the best that we could. And, and it was really helpful to me. Like there were a lot of times where he would be able to take off and come with me whenever he got chemotherapy or whenever he had to be inpatient. The police department was amazing, and they donated a lot of sick time. And so I definitely never at any point felt like I was doing it completely on my own.
Wow. So you get the misdiagnosis that Tyler, you thought didn't have cancer, and they said, oh yeah, now he does. And we fast forward to where the chemotherapy's not working. What happened next? In that was a real, like, oh man, this is the next hurdle that God has put in our path for whatever reason. Your son, I believe your son lost his foot, did he not?
Yes. So, the sad thing about childhood cancer is that there's not always a lot of options at progression. And so Tyler's tumor was not necessarily characteristic. And, if you think about back then, that was, that was probably 16 years ago. So there have been a lot of advances in, like targeted therapies or genomic testing, but to identify possible therapies. But
hey, with the way things are going today, we could talk about back then as being like, remember in October of 2019?
Exactly. So much, I mean, it's such a rapidly evolving area. But, unfortunately, we really only had one chemotherapy regimen that we were offered as being potentially effective. And it was kind of the one that they had used for infantile fibrosarcoma. And so we tried it, and then we did not get the response that we hoped for. So it was kind of like, okay, well, what do we do now? So they presented us with a couple of options, and just kind of went through the pros and the cons. One of them was to take the tumor out again, but then, his foot was so small, you couldn't really get good margins. So they would install like radiation rods and he would get radiation. And hopefully that would kill off any of the remaining cells. Then the other option was, amputation. And then, so the disadvantages obviously is that with a solid tumor, if any of those cells had not died from radiation and they metastasized, well, you only had one chemotherapy regimen for us to try and it didn't work. So like we're going to end up with it somewhere else in the body, most likely the lungs or the brain, and then it's not going to respond. Like that's a really crappy option. And then also radiation could cause a lot of, it could cause burning, it could cause pain. Back then too, I don't think there were as many options for radiation. Like now they have beads or they have focalized local radiation. So basically it just didn't seem like a good scenario for us. And then we would always have that fear, right? And I think that for us, even though amputation seemed incredibly scary and we didn't know any other kids with amputations at the time, it just seemed like, well, at least we might be dealing with a new issue that will last the rest of his life, but hope at least it's not going to kill him is our hope. So that's how we made that decision.
And obviously the amputation worked. I mean, if that's a good term to use, is that it worked. As you're going through pharmacy school and you're pursuing your PharmD degree, when they were talking to you about the different chemo options and things like that, were you in your mind thinking, okay, how is this drug going to react in his body? Did you ever turn that part of your brain on while you were having these discussions with doctors?
That's a really interesting question and a great question, because
we try, April. We try to ask good questions.
I think that it gave me, okay, so when you're going through school and or even like if you're watching a commercial about a new drug, right, and you hear the disclaimer at the end, it can cause nausea and vomiting, it can cause diarrhea, it can cause headaches, like you see this laundry list, and I think we equate it to whatever symptoms similar to that we've experienced before, right?
You don't know how many times I've had to answer questions from family members being associated with that industry and going, listen, if one person got that side effect, the FDA makes you listed as a side effect for that particular drug. Like, it's not going to rip your hair out. I promise you, this drug is not going to rip you. They're like, oh, side effects might be, you'll lose your eyebrows. Like, no. Don't be afraid to lose your eyebrows. I have to have these you do too. You have to have these conversations with people. Like, it's okay. You're not going to have a heart attack if you take if you get a medication for arthritis. It's okay.
Right. But, so, yeah, hearing the list is definitely daunting, but I think I didn't understand that chemo-induced nausea and vomiting is very different than the nausea and vomiting that you get from the flu. I didn't understand that the diarrhea that you get could be grade 5 and not, like what the diarrhea that you get with the GI bug. So I think that for me, that was, for one, it was incredibly shocking and scary to see it as a mom, but it was also incredibly eye-opening to see it as a future healthcare provider, because it just gave you a greater awareness and a greater, and definitely empathy, but for sure greater awareness, and to be able to understand, like, having that perspective, why people don't want to be compliant with their medications. And because for us, we just think, oh, nausea, we see it on the commercial, nausea and vomiting, we read on the package insert, but I mean, it was no joke. And so seeing that, I realized that even though I understood what the potential side effects could be, I was not prepared for what came still, because when
Mhm.
Tyler's nausea and vomiting hit from his chemo and we were at home, I mean, it was like uncontrollable, and it was the scariest thing, like to have a child that never thrown up before just basically spit up, and then all of us, and all of a sudden I have a baby that is like, was almost like a seizure. He was just just uncontrollable. It was the most terrifying thing. And so I remember, Billy, I called him and he was on duty, and we got an escort and we raced to the hospital, and so that they could hook him up to an IV with an
Because you can't
antibiotic to
just
help
give
with that.
him, you can't give him baby Pepto. It's not the
No,
same thing, and it's not like eating. It's not like, oh, he ate something and it made him sick or something like that. To your point, the chemo really, and people that have gone through cancer, and I've seen it from the outside looking in, it just, chemo is very violent to people's bodies sometimes. It just causes a lot of things. So once you guys got through the hurdle of the amputation, you know, did you feel like, okay, this is good, things are progressing? How did Tyler, we've not really talked about Tyler. How did he, as a young child, I mean, he's learning to walk, he's a toddler. Now he's got to relearn to walk with missing his foot. How did he cope and deal with all of it as a toddler and moving into his pre-kindergarten years?
well, it was definitely a challenge at that time to keep him in something that fit him, that was like conducive for his size. um we had a lot of skin issues, and that kept him off of his leg. So that was difficult, because at that age you just want to get back on your feet and go. That's what
Mhm.
they want to do. So he really wasn't, he was young enough that it didn't get him down. I mean, we definitely have went through the spectrum of um, issues here and there that come about. But in general, I mean, Tyler has really dealt with his disability very well. It hasn't been perfect. We've had our hard moments, but he's very determined and resilient and positive. He's very positive, and he's very soulful, and believes that this was part of God's purpose, part of God's path for him in his
Mhm.
greater purpose.
How old was he when he really realized that he was a cancer survivor? Because now a lot of people wear that, April, as a badge of honor. They say, "Hey, I've survived this disease that killed other people. I survived it." And you know what? I'm proud to be. And for all those out there, all you cancer survivors out there, I salute you. We salute you. Hats off to you, because cancer is it's a deadly disease. We spend billions of dollars every year trying to find a cure, and we haven't found a cure yet. So my hat's off to all you cancer survivors that have walked through an incredibly difficult road to come out of the other side and say, yeah, I survived cancer. How was his outlook as a kid? He knows now, and obviously the wisdom of maturity, but as he gets to be, 7, 8, 9, 10, and in his preteen years, what was his outlook like then?
Um, it's definitely something he appreciated early on, because we lost friends, along the way that had been patients with us, and I think that was hard. But he also will say, I mean, and has said for a very long time, that when people ask him why he's so driven or accomplished, that it's not because, I mean, you would expect a teenage boy to be like, well, I mean, I have one leg, I have a lot to prove. But his answer is always, I have friends that died from what didn't kill me, and I have a reason to be here. So I owe it to them to be living the biggest possible life I can possibly live. And he means that. So.
And obviously now he's what, 19, 20?
He'll be 19 in November. So it's almost.
He will be 19 in November, and obviously a college freshman going to school.
Yes.
And did it shape him? Did the cancer surviving shape what he wanted to do with his life? Because, some kids that go through that, they say, okay, well, because I survived this, I'm going to do this. Like if, and I don't want to trivialize it, but a young person might say, well, my house burned as a kid, so I'm going to be a firefighter.
Yeah.
Because I don't want somebody else to go through that. Or did that change his trajectory and what he thought about becoming and where he ultimately decided that he wanted to do as a career path?
Yeah, it's definitely always been, he's always been forward thinking about that, even more than what his skills were, I think, at the time. I mean, I believe you're capable of doing anything that you want to do. And so I think that rubbed off on him a little bit.
I've always wanted to fly. I've always wanted to I wanted to have the gift of teleportation so that I didn't have to wait in line at the airport. Well, when we could fly, when we could travel freely, or anything like that. So yeah. But
so
what's
originally he thought, I want to be an oncologist so I can cure cancer. And then he realized, like deep science and medicine only might not be my forte. So then he said, okay, well, maybe I could be a lawyer that, helps to advocate for, rights for either patients or disabled athletes, people with disabilities. But in so earlier, it all came together last January. He was selected to do the first men's retreat, spiritual men's retreat that Bethany Hamilton held. Mm-hmm. So, she's the surfer that lost her arm in the shark attack. And so she held an event called The Forge, and Tyler was able to go to that. And he really got introduced to someone who, he's met a lot of doctors. He's met a lot of doctors. And he's known a lot of people involved in sports and sports medicine, but he didn't really connect the two could merge until he met someone at that retreat that was helping them so significantly that week, that was sports medicine doctor, but more specialized in adaptive athletics. And he said, well, that's what I want to do. I want to be the doctor for the Paralympic team. I want to help other athletes like me that want to be driven, but that end up, they end up having to have multiple doctors communicate to try and come up with a solution. He was like, I want to be the solution. I want to know what will help them specifically. Yeah. So that's what he's going to school to do. He's in the athletic trainer program, which gets him a lot of time on the field, and he's doing his pre-med requisites as a parallel to that program. So,
and April, I really believe, I believe with all my heart that one day we are going to see an amputee play a professional sport and do it well. I think because, and earlier today I recorded a podcast with a friend of mine that's an orthopedic surgeon here locally. And I believe that we are making such strides in technology that it's very possible that someone that's been an amputee of a foot or maybe, below the knee amputation could play professional sports at a high level. The technology has gotten it. And it could be that Tyler works with that person or people that end up playing NFL football or end up playing Major League Baseball or being in the National Basketball Association, the NBA. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. Do you?
No, not at all. And I think that in the last few years, adaptive sports have gotten a little bit more recognition. I do believe that they're definitely not on at the recognized at the same level yet, or appreciated or paid at the same level yet.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say that the more that people support the Paralympics, the more that they watch, and just see that these people are doing incredible things despite incredible challenges. So it's not that they're not incredible because of their challenges. They're incredible really despite their challenges.
Yeah.
And I'm just so in awe by that community and a lot of the people that we've really gotten to know, and it's been very humbling and just really just incredible to have role models. So Tyler's very involved in the Challenged Athletes Foundation. He was their Rising Star Award winner last year, along with his friend Liv, and is always connected to his friends through Challenged Athletes Foundation, and helps them with fundraisers or any opportunity that he can to be an advocate, because it's super important for kids to have role models like that.
It really is. It really is. Tell me about the drifted drum. I've got to ask about that in the last few minutes that we have on the podcast. Tell me about it. You smiled. You're like, oh, I've been waiting for, I've been asking you all these questions about other things. But tell me about the drifted drum.
So the drifted drum is our business of encouragement. So drifted means.
What about that? I mean, my goodness, what about that? The Intentional Encourager podcast, you go, what's our business about encourage? Combined too, with the podcast. So what about that?
Yes, we're on the same path, you and I. So we started this company because I was in the process of publishing my book, and I really want, you kind of get to this point where you say, okay, well, what is this going to become? Is this just a book that's gonna, I'm gonna put it out there and hopefully people will gain something for it, and it might just be the only thing that I do in regards to this, and that's okay. But what do we want it to become? So I had Tyler sit down with me, and I said, I'm sharing this story, and not only do I want your buy-in, I also had to have that conversation with my husband too, but because a lot of it is definitely, I'm very transparent in my.
I don't think you had to push real hard. Like if it was my wife going, yeah, we're sharing this story, I'd be like, okay, tell me what I got to do,
Yeah, he was definitely, he was supportive, which I was kind of surprised because I'm definitely very honest in my book, but he was good. He was good with it. But Tyler, I said, I'm sharing a lot of your story and I'm putting this book out there. Like, we have an opportunity to determine, is this just a book or is this more, and how involved do you want to be? And he was like, well, what is our main purpose of putting our story out there? And we were like, both agreed that it was to give other people hope in a difficult situation. And so he said, well, I said, how would you do that outside from the speaking engagements that you do, outside from, just really counseling your friends or, whatever that looks like? What would you do to encourage? And he said, well, I want to have my own apparel. Like, I want to display images that I feel like are peaceful, or like, that are kind of like a component of me that allow people to ask more questions, like why do you like what you like, and allow me to share my story. So, and then we both agreed that events were going to be an important component. So we came up with the drifted drum model, which has an apparel component, kind of a gift component, and the events and the publishing. And so my thought is that I will, my book was the first, but I'm helping another couple of authors that are going to be drifted drum authors that are publishing with me to share their story about how they turned their purpose into pain as well. So drifted means ended up in a place by external forces. You didn't really plan to go there, you're drifted there. And then drum is a vessel that can be emptied and filled over and over again. And I feel like that really sums us up really well.
That's awesome. In the last couple minutes that we've got, I want you to share with the audience your biggest piece of intentional encouragement, April, because again, we've told your story and they can read about it in your book, No Mess, No Message. And but you know, in this format, somebody may be driving in the car, they may be going for a run, they may be, you know, cooking dinner or something like that. What's your biggest piece of intentional encouragement to folks out there?
So I will share that two things, even when I felt like I wasn't very religious or my relationship wasn't strong in God, there are two things that really brought me hope in everything that we went through. And one is the verse, Jeremiah 29:11, that says that God's plan is better than my plan. And I am a planner. And so when things
You don't
go
say.
how I
You don't say, right?
Yes, I am admittedly a planner. And when things don't go my way, they don't go how I plan, you know, it's so easy for me to get frustrated or overwhelmed unless I really cling to that and understand that I might not understand the situation that I'm facing right now, but God knows. And he sees that, and it could potentially be leading to something else. And I just have to, one, learn as much as I can in the situation that I'm facing, whether it's learn about me, how I respond to things, how to trust God more, learn about, you know, like what's wrong in my life that might need to be fixed. And the second thing that I really gravitate toward is that God's word says that he will even use things meant for our harm for our good. And so to me, those two are put together are almost everything that I need to find my grounding again. And so I just really want someone to know that if they're feeling overwhelmed, you know, that especially if you even have just a sliver of belief that God's word is true, then stand your ground on that, because if you get a new day, you get a new chance. And so if you trust him to allow those two things to come to fruition, then even if the situation is difficult right now, it potentially could be just a painful part of the process that becomes your path to success.
That is so good. What a perfect way to end it. Find her on LinkedIn at April Jones. You have to look April Jones, and she's like the little PharmD thing, because it's, you know, it's a professional network and, you know, everything like that. They can also go to thedriftedDrum.com. Have I got that right?
Yeah, the easiest way to connect to me for sure is to go to thedriftedDrum.com. It has a link to all my media appearances. There's a contact us at the bottom. The email goes directly to my business account. I have an Instagram, a TikTok, a Facebook.
I have her cell phone number, but you're not getting it. You're not getting it. I have enough, but I know how to get a hold of you, but you're not getting that. But yeah, Instagram, TikTok. I can't get into TikTok, April. I'm too old for TikTok. I just, you know.
There's hashtags for over 30, over 40. It's for everyone.
Pushing 50. Here you go.
Hashtag pushing 50. See, like you just need to create your own trend.
I'm going to encourage myself just to kind of stay right here and not get, but no, this has been so good. Thank you for being so transparent and sharing your story. And two, thank you for just helping others and encouragement. And I've said this to people before, and you know this, is that and I use business in air quotes, the business of encouragement. You give a lot more encouragement than you take in. And so thank you for taking that to the next level. And I wish you all the best. And thank you for joining me on the Intentional Encourager podcast.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing our story.
My thanks as always to producer Bryce Sexton and technical advisor Matt Means. And the ultimate thanks goes to the Lord Jesus Christ, who provides intentional encouragement every day
His Word. And until next time, remember, everyone, everywhere, at any time, and any place can be an intentional